Well, hey everyone, how you doing today? Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I wanted to continue a little more about what we were talking about in the previous video about the Roswell crash, the Roswell wreckage, and so forth. If you haven't seen my part one of what really happened at Roswell, you might want to look at that first. I had some questions after I posted it. Someone said, why are you posting this now? After all, Roswell happened a long time ago, right? 1947. Well, the reason is I got to meet Jesse Marcel Jr., one of the Roswell witnesses, at the citizen hearing in Washington, D.C., the citizen hearing on disclosure last April 2013. And Jesse Marcel Jr. passed away not too long ago, and I saw some reports in the newspaper that basically said that Roswell was nothing more than a crashed military mogul balloon and so forth. And the problem with that explanation, that our official explanation that we're getting from the government and the military, the Air Force put out their own report about it, is it doesn't fit at all with what the witnesses said they saw. We have up to somewhere around 100 witnesses. I mentioned some of them in the previous part one video. And what these witnesses saw and what they say they experienced is completely the opposite of the idea that it's just a weather balloon. And this has been true throughout the history of the UFO ET phenomena, where the official explanation is always that it's swamp gas, flocks of geese, Venus, or something like this, and this doesn't make any sense. We were talking about Colonel Pappy Henderson in the previous video, and doing a little more research about him. This is the pilot that flew the Roswell wreckage out of the Roswell area to Wright-Patterson, or Wright Field as it was called back then, in 1947 in Ohio. Well, it turns out that Pappy Henderson, not only did he tell his daughters that he saw wreckage of a craft and extraterrestrial bodies, apparently he said this on 3 other occasions. Starting in the late 70s, he told a friend of his that he had seen alien bodies associated with the Roswell wreckage. He later told this to his wife in 1980 when a story came out in Roswell, about Roswell, in the LA papers, and he said he had been there and had seen the wreckage and that it wasn't a balloon. And then he told this to his buddies at the reunion of the 509th Bomb Group sometime in the mid-80s, the same exact thing. Now again, Pappy Henderson was a guy with very high-level security clearances, we have to assume, working at such an elite Army Air Force base in the late 40s that dealt with nuclear weapons and so forth. And so it just doesn't seem conceivable that it's just simply a balloon. Then we have the story of Jun Crane, also known as Jun Kaaba. If you want to look for the Crane-Clarkson interview, this is a woman that worked at Wright Field 3 different times starting in the late 40s, and she tells us that when she saw this story come out in 1996, 97, that this was simply a crash of a mogul balloon by the Air Force, she felt really incensed, because she said when she was working at Wright Field, starting, I believe, in 1948, people would come in, talk about the crash of Roswell, the recovery of extraterrestrial bodies that she said were about 4 feet high. She remembers them talking about the fact that UFOs were as thick as either fleas or stars, as she says, in the White Sands missile testing area and the Roswell area. And she was even given a piece of wreckage that one of these people who worked at the base said was a piece of the Roswell wreckage. And she said it was very paper thin, made of metal, you couldn't bend it, you couldn't break it, you couldn't burn it, just like all the other witnesses said. Again, Jun Crane had a security clearance, a high-level security clearance, to work at such a base in the 1940s and early 50s. Jun Crane was someone who never published a book, never appeared in the media. She just wanted to talk to Jim Clarkson, who's a former police detective, worked in the field of security, because she felt that what we were reading in the papers was so incompatible with what she knew to be the truth. She had no motive to make this up, and she passed away several years later after giving that interview. So we have to believe that her testimony, which goes on for pages and pages, you can find it online as a PDF, that her testimony is credible. Then there are a couple other witnesses you might just come across One is Gerald Anderson, who you can see the video on my New Crystal Mind blog. I posted it there. Just search for Gerald Anderson. He was a kid in 1947, happened to go out with his dad and his family to the Socorro area of New Mexico to look for agates and rocks and things like this. They're out there in the morning and come across this crashed disc, as he says, leaning against a kind of a hillside. He saw several bodies outside the craft, one of whom was injured and still alive, and one was not injured. They attempted to communicate with these beings, but they obviously didn't speak the same language. They tried Spanish, English, some other languages, and at the time they didn't know what they were dealing with. But he says shortly thereafter a whole geological group showed up who had been camping in the desert and thought it was a meteor that had crashed. Then another archaeological professor shows up a short time later, and then just a few minutes after that, the U.S. military, which told everyone to leave the area and were quite threatening, as he remembered. He said when they saw this, the military didn't act like they hadn't seen this before. They seemed to be familiar with it and to know what was going on. Gerald Anderson was interviewed by UFO researcher Stanton Friedman in 1990. He remembered very specific details about the area that you wouldn't know about unless you had been there. And finally, there's just comes to mind the testimony of Private Calvin Cox, who worked at the Roswell base in 1947. And he said that he was given a machine gun and told to guard this hangar after the wreckage came in, and basically to shoot on sight anyone who attempted to enter the hangar. Okay, so I don't think that you would be given those orders for a crashed balloon. After all, a mogul balloon similar to the one that the Air Force says crashed in Roswell, flight number 7, just a few months later, went off track. The Army Air Force lost it, and civilians recovered it, and none of those people were contacted. There was no security around such a balloon. So if this didn't happen for flight number 7, why would it happen for this incident, which the Air Force now claims was mogul balloon flight number 4? It doesn't add up. And another piece of interesting information here is Gerald Anderson. He was in Socorro, right? But the wreckage was in Roswell. There were 2 crashes. That's what we're learning. And Anderson said that in the side of the disc was a gash that looked like it could have been made by another disc exactly that size. So it appears what we're dealing with is the crash of 2 craft, something like this, and they were separated by about 100 miles. And it's a much more complex incident than we're being told. And this is really the issue here. On one hand, we have this official explanation of what this phenomena is, which always attempts to debunk it. And then we have hundreds of witnesses, in this case of Roswell, who have very consistent testimony and tell us that we're dealing with flying discs, bodies. These are people with security clearances. Why would they make this up? Okay, so you do the math on this one, but it appears that we have an unofficial and an official history, and they're not meaning quite right. Something's not quite right here. Okay, anyway, I thought you'd enjoy that, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care for now. Bye.